Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Where's it coming from? So, I was watching this video last night, and apparently a college student, figured out how to kill off mosquitoes. And you'd think that it was like one of those duh moments, but apparently it was a little complicated. So the way that it works is right now we have these bug zappers, and they use this burst technique where they send a broad spectrum of radiation, of UV light. And it turns out that is, and the analogy they used was, that's like trying to catch a fish with a bazooka. And so what this guy did, and he's got a condition where when he gets stung by a mosquito, his skin puffs up like a balloon. And I actually went to a Boy Scout camp with a guy who had that similar kind of allergy. So I know that it's painful and probably really, really just a horrible experience, dreading going to sleep when you can hear a mosquito in the room. But anyways, he figured out that there is a very narrow wavelength of UV light, which not only attracts mosquitoes, but it also kills them. And so within like a matter of minutes, he can kill all of the mosquitoes in a room. And this is actually quite incredible, because what it means is, mosquitoes have been around since the age of the dinosaurs. They've been around for a long time. And so if there's a way to get rid of them quickly and easily, oh man, say goodbye to malaria, say goodbye to Zika, say goodbye to any kind of disease that they may transmit. And that's a huge win. That's the stuff that dreams are made of. And why did it take so long?
Well, I think the issue is that they had to do it without destroying the rest of the ecosystem as a byproduct. Because they've been trying for a long time, and then the byproducts would end up being too far extending to keep doing those methods. So
Sure.
they, finally, if this is something that can only focus on mosquitoes and not end up affecting everything else in the ecosystem, then that'll be amazing. Because I think that's just been the major problem before.
Yeah, I think that's what that's what I gleaned from the video, is that there is this one wavelength, or this bandwidth, and it just knocks them out, and it doesn't hurt humans. It's narrow.
It's not just humans. I'm saying like everything else in the ecosystem.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
I was talking about humans. I was talking about like all the other bugs and the vegetation, because that's the problem, is when you poison the mosquitoes, everything else gets poisoned in the area as a byproduct. So
Yeah.
that's where,
It's
if that UV just doesn't affect other insects or other vegetation, then that's one thing. But if they're only worrying about humans, then that's where there could be insane. This is the problem, is that there's oftentimes like you try to focus on one part of the ecosystem, and then that part of the ecosystem was important to keep the rest of it functioning somehow that we didn't understand until you destroy that part, and then the rest falls out of sync because that one part is annoying to us. And that's like, I get so, it's like, on the one hand, of course, mosquitoes are fucking annoying and nobody needs malaria. But that's where I'm always like wary of, especially like, I don't know how old this person is that made the discovery.
they just graduated from college.
I feel like those types of people in the West are like, they tout those people as problem solvers, when those people don't actually understand the problem they're trying to solve, and then end up making worse problems. Like, that's not always the case, and I hope this isn't the case, but again, it's like when you take out the wolves in a population, or you take out too many deer, or you add frogs or some shit. There's always some repercussions that are unanticipated, sometimes good and sometimes bad. But it's like, if humans, I really hope that it's mosquitoes and no other insects or vegetation, because that's like, if they were only worried about humans, then that's like, I don't know. It's like, I'd have to see the methodology just to, because I don't like to be a pessimist about shit at all. But humans just are so good at repeatedly making the same mistakes.
Well, we also want to consider the food chain. So mosquitoes may be consumed by other animals, and if there's a sudden incredible exponential decrease in the mosquito population in an area, then there may be a ripple effect to other species that would normally consume the mosquitoes.
Yeah.
So
I think the idea was that this was an appliance that you would install in your home, like.
I see.
So
I was thinking perhaps there would be like a larger one that could be put outside in areas where people would move between homes that aren't necessarily furnished with modern amenities, or in villages and parts of the world where there isn't much other infrastructure-based development. So people would not only have the option to have a smaller unit in their home, but there could be a larger unit outside to attract the insects.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I guess if it's just for the home use, that's obviously completely different than trying to eradicate mosquitoes outside. But that's where, when it was being framed, I guess I was thinking of like,
yeah, I didn't frame it very well.
I wasn't sure how they were going to be doing it, because that's where that's a whole different thing. So that's like not even on the same scale.
I should probably try and describe it. It's a UV emitting LED sandwiched between two pieces of plexiglass, and it's like mounted on a wall.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is you would put it in some part of the house, like the kitchen or something, because people spend a lot of time in the kitchen, and when mosquitoes came looking for you, they would be exposed to this radiation that would kill them. So far, it seems like it's a long ways off. In the video, they say in a few years, like 5 or 6 years or so, this should be a fairly common device found in people's homes. But I think that, like any kind of pest control, I mean, like you were saying, it deserves a lot of testing. It deserves to be treated really seriously.
I can see it being advertised on American television as one of those as seen on TV type commodities. Perhaps in 7 or 8 years, it'll be so ubiquitous in various consumer outlets, or depending on the shopping paradigm that unfolds due to COVID, maybe there aren't going to be as many people hanging out outside, or maybe there are going to be people who are spending more time in their outdoors, of their properties. So, they would have one to put out on their patio instead of those citronella candles or those torches.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's like in the context of the same type of clothing. Because I imagine it's not too long before we have some sort of nano mesh weave shit that mosquitoes can't get through. That's also climate controlled, that works in extreme heat and extreme cool. I don't think that's that far off, personally.
Well, yeah, we've got that electrostatic fiber being developed at IU that kills viruses. So.
Yep, and then imagine that in a fucking bodysuit weave. That shit is like, once you have it, especially. I don't know. There's a whole lot to aesthetics that have been sort of, I don't say thrust upon us by capitalism, but our notion of aesthetics for clothing are kind of artificial in that if people really were into aesthetics the way that they think they are, they would get their clothes tailored way more often and built from scratch way more often than they do. And in the process of doing that, the whole reason I say that is because I started going to this certain place a while back. Well, I didn't even go there. I'd buy their clothes online used and then take them in because they offer free tailoring for their specific clothing. So it's like you don't even have to buy the shit from there and you can get it tailored for free effectively. Because it's like, I don't know if they caught on and changed their policy and they're like, oh, now you have to bring in your receipt to get it tailored for free. But the way they do it, it just makes it worth buying their clothes if you want to get it shortened, get it hemmed a little bit. You can just have that shit done for free. Like, and in the process, I realized that I didn't have to wear clothes that weren't made for me. And in doing that for years and starting to be, they're like, oh, I can design my own clothes and get them printed up and design my own shoes and get them made. That's when I started to understand that capitalism gives people this notion of a unique identity that you can buy off the shelf that obviously everybody else can buy off the shelf as well. So at the end of the day, it's not really a unique identity. Even down to the whole iPhone, I culture becoming a thing that's trying to beat into people's heads that they are individuals when they buy this product. Yeah. It's obviously an illusion that when you look at it from a distance perspective, it's like, oh yeah, clearly you can't buy individuality off a shelf.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the iPhone. I actually like the iPhone because the screen and originally, before they had so many different versions of iPhone, everyone had the same screen, everyone had the same camera. So when you saw a picture of something, you knew exactly, you had a better idea of what you were looking at, and it kind of provided this kind of unity of image capture and presentation. And so it made it easier to feel like you might actually be there looking at the image that your friend just took and sent to you from across the country. But that's not the case anymore because there are numerous different iPhones with crazy different camera systems and different qualities of display. So that's no longer the case. I suppose if everyone had the same model of iPhone or a group of friends all had the same model, specific model, then that would actually be the case again, but it's not anymore.
In regards to clothing and tailoring clothing, oftentimes taking advantage of a period of time or using an event of importance in one's life is typically the impetus for tailoring something or getting a specific kind of clothing for a special occasion or to present well in a business situation, as opposed to purchasing clothes or designing clothes oneself and tailoring them to fit one's own personal ideas of fashion or style or preferred method of self-expression. Because we see oftentimes the bespoke suit or the tailored suit as something that tends to cost a little bit more than simply buying a suit wholesale off the shelf and at a retailer or at an outlet. And even within the fashion industry, a lot of handmade clothes tend to cost significantly more, probably because of the creative energy that goes into them, but also because of the demand and who the customers usually are. And these customers for these handmade high value clothes are typically very wealthy individuals. So I think that there's been a bit of a disparity presented in terms of the availability for the broad population to create their own clothing or to generate their own clothing or to make it something that should be accessible to everybody.
That perception is there. I don't think that's actually true in real life, though, because that's where I'm not a fucking rich person. I can get my own shit made, and the whole reason is just because I've done the research and then figured out like how to get tailored jeans. It's really easy. And then on top of that, when you're talking about buying cheap ass jeans at Walmart versus going to a different place and buying jeans that you can get tailored for free, it's not even that much of a difference. It's just a matter of they're framing it so that when you buy the cheap ass jeans at Walmart, you feel okay when they get holes ripped in them a quarter as fast as the things that cost maybe twice as much. If jeans cost $50 at Walmart, they might cost $100 at a high end, not even a high end, a place that uses high quality material, because all denim is not the same. So what ends up happening is the perception of the throwaway culture where, oh, I'll wear these things out. The idea was put there because then it makes you willing to accept the things that wear out faster because it's perceived to be worth paying less for that, when if you actually pay a little bit more, the shit doesn't wear out nearly as fast and it can fit you better. So you have these people, I want to say, just be based on the bell curve, at least 50% of Americans don't have clothes that fit their bodies. Yeah. For one reason or another. And then you take it like the notion of what is fitting one's body. Well, of course it has to be comfortable. But the issue is if a person has a body shape and a body type, the clothes should accentuate that and give a silhouette that then gives the best form for that person's body type. It's supposed to make their body type look better. And that's what clothes are for. They're not to hide your body. That whole shame principle was put there by the Garden of Eden story. And that's again, there's all these things where people can look at clothes are not meant to fucking hide our bodies to prevent us from being shamed. That's just a Christian or Judeo-Christian pseudo interpretation of the text that's there. What ends up happening is all of our perceptions of how we should portray ourselves are then limited by what we think is available, because then people don't want to take the time. Like, I didn't want to shop for clothes before because it's like seen as a feminine thing. Well, it's not that I did it because it was feminine, but it's one of those things where as a man, you're not encouraged to put time into caring about how you look.
There's a whole Bob's
Oh yeah. There's a whole episode of Bob's Burgers where they pants shop together, and it's one of these things where they're being shamed for trying to care about how they look in a pair of jeans, and it's the whole episode just reinforces this culture, or it highlights the culture of shaming men for caring how they look and making it something that's supposed to be only something that women or gay men do. And then on top of that, in the process, reducing the standards so that, yeah, you have dudes walking around with holes in their shirt in public thinking that's okay. That's not okay. Like, it's not the fact that, yeah, if you can't afford a new shirt, I'm not trying to shame those people, but people who've had the same shit for years, having money turn over in their hands, not replacing their clothes, are like going out in public because society's like, oh, you're a dude. You don't have to care about your appearance. You can be Peter Griffin and you're going to get a Lois who has to fucking do everything and make sure she looks good for society, but you can look like a fucking slob as a dude because that's just what dudes do. And there's this standard that just keeps being perpetuated by our media that holds cis hetero dudes to the lowest standards while then holding everybody else to these high standards by reinforcing the notion that, like, oh yeah, if you're a gay dude, you're going to have to walk around looking pretty to make sure everybody knows you're gay. Otherwise, we're going to be confused and think you're a hetero dude, and that's not okay.
There are clothes for all genders that actually are at higher price points that already have pre-worn holes in them, tops and bottoms, and this is perhaps a way for people to show off their bodies, but it also seems to be a vehicle for demonstrating wealth in an ironic fashion.
They do that. They make fun of poor people by doing shit like that. Like, I'll pay $1,000 to get some jeans with holes in them that look like I wore them that way. I'll have somebody wear clothes for me until so the first time I put them on, it looks like they've been worn and used in a fucking coal mine. But that's just dilapidated chic in 2008 for derelict. And you know, it's shit like that where you know, what's it called? That movie
Zoolander?
No. Damn, it
Trash
was like
Couture.
Ryan Phillippe. Was it Greater Expectations? No.
Dangerous Liaisons.
I think it was based on Greater Expectations. Damn, I can't. Sarah Michelle Gellar. They did this movie that was based on a book.
Oh, it's based on Dangerous Liaisons. It's I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I can't think of the name. Like I could but the movie is the name is irrelevant. The movie is about rich people making fun of poor people.
Cruel Intentions.
What's it called?
Cruel Intentions.
Cruel Intentions.
Yeah, it's a
yeah,
modern
that
interpretation.
Movie is when you see it, it's like the story is based on a book that was then also made into a movie earlier, but the whole thing is based on a culture that's real that people don't understand until you get around rich people and watch them make fun of poor people in ways where you're like, whoa, that poor person thought that they were being helped, but they were being mocked. Yeah. And they do it in ways that it's like a meta culture that unless you just are around enough rich people, you would think it's only shit that happens in movies, but the movies exist because it happens in real life.
That story was published in 1782. It was first published in the volumes by Durand Neveu, and it's. I actually read that in a literature class I took at IU.
The name of the original book?
Dangerous Liaison. Liaison Dangereuse. It's actually a pretty good read, and I'm sure that more people are familiar with Cruel Intentions, which I'm pretty sure
American people for sure.
Well, yeah, it's a classic. It's a fantastic story because you know you get to watch you get to imagine this group of people just being completely horrible to each other, and then eventually they all end up turning on each other.
Yep.
And I think that's just the nature of humans who go down that dark path. You know, actually, I remember feeling like I was watching that kind of culture play out within various friend circles when I was going to raves, where I would ultimately, just as a casual observer that would only hang out, you know, at the rave and occasionally at a club. I watched these groups of people kind of eventually, once they exhausted their supply of fresh meat, they would turn on each other. And one by one, members of those various groups would drop out or leave or get fed up and move on. And then eventually they would disintegrate completely, like the circle of friends. I want to say that I watched that happen, you know, a dozen times easily.
Well, and I think that's why they made that movie named Parasite, in that there are people in society, they don't even necessarily have to be rich. They will eat up somebody until they're used up and then move on.
Yeah.
Or in the process, take themselves down with the other person or group. And those people are clearly parasites on society. It's just hard to know. You know, there are energy vampires in a sense that's not some sort of metaphysical concept. They're just people, the people who are arguing on Facebook who have zero intention of ever changing their perspective. Those people are energy vampires or leeches. And it doesn't have to be this, oh, they're sucking your chi. Like, no, they're draining your actual energy by wasting your time, their time in a way that invigorates them, but drains your life energy. You don't get that life energy back, and then you turn around and have to leech off of somebody else to rejuvenate by passing that bullshit on. And that's where those people on the internet and on Facebook, well, they're on Twitter too. But those people just hang out on Facebook, leeching off of other people's energy, and then people just feed them. And that's like, they say don't feed the trolls, but at the same time, people just wade into water filled with leeches and sit around and have their energy leached, not even caring about it in a way that makes it seem like they want to. But I think it's because they've been drained so bad that they don't realize what's happening to them, and that's kind of where
Yeah.
it's like,
I watched I saw a dialogue unfold the other day, and you've seen that you've seen the Boogaloo Proud Boy federal agent meme, I'm sure, and it involved one of our own. It involved Tim Lukasik, and he was talking to a guy who saw the meme and said, "What's the deal? They're all wearing tactical gear." And of course, Tim attempts to break down why these images are concerning, but this guy wouldn't get past the tactical gear. Like, that's it for him. It ended at tactical gear because he owns tactical gear, but he's not a Fed, and so why is there a problem? And what occurred to me was, and Tim laid out some really really good arguments for why there was a problem, but the guy didn't want to hear any of it, and I get that. He didn't want to actually do anything. Actually, his first argument was an ad hominem, so I really didn't pay attention until way later in the afternoon. But it occurred to me that there's no point in talking to somebody like that because they're not there to have a dialogue. They're just there to disagree, be contrarian.
Well, if they also don't want to acknowledge the fact that somebody dressing up like a tactical officer could easily, under false pretenses, assault people in the streets and try and justify their actions or try and escape based off of the way that they're appearing. So that kind of equipment is broadly available and is worn by people who are known to frequent environments where there are a lot of people who are now being targeted because of their ideologies, then that also merits discussion.
well, I think it was Louisville. They had a face off. Well, it wasn't really a face off. They sort of tried to frame it that way for Fox News, but there was like 30 racist ass 3%ers, whatever the fuck those pieces of shit are called. And then there was the black militia marching, and I think it was like 2,000 black militia or something, and like 30 of the 3% idiots.
Yeah.
Like, then Fox News tried to make it seem like they had some sort of confrontation, but then somebody actually showed how it was played out, and the fucking mouth breathers were behind this fucking barricade, well far away from the actual black militia, so they weren't even close trying to face them down. So it was like Fox News is trying to be like, oh yeah, the racists are standing up to those Negroes, when in reality, if you see it, they were definitely cowering down the street.
Yeah, it's they stopped paying attention to the protests when citizen journalists revealed that it wasn't actually the protesters causing the riots.
Yep.
And the media also stopped paying attention to like Seattle once it turned peaceful, and they only started paying attention again when law enforcement went in and beat people up again.
You'd think the protests stopped based on how the media is not reporting them.
Yeah, I mean, even though it's like ongoing.
Yep.
I saw this image of Portland, and they outlined the actual city limits of Portland, and then they put a red dot where the protests are taking place, and I don't think that it's more than 1% of the area of Portland is being consumed by this protest. It just can't be. There's no way that it's taking up more than a couple blocks in any direction. There's no way that it's consuming enough of the city to undermine economic motion in the city.
And if anything's undermined the economic movement, it's the way COVID is inherently affected the global economy. So naturally, people are going to try and scapegoat protests for their own purposes in order to justify a certain type of crackdown. Because if the protests were more, if there was more violence, if there were actual riots as opposed to viewing the protests through a hackneyed trope of violence, then they would show up in the media more often. And if they showed up in the media more often, because if it bleeds, it leads, then there would be an even greater justification for the approach that's currently being taken. But that's not the case. So you have to think, why is there such a virulent response to people just exercising their rights to free speech and literally just standing in the streets in a small isolated area, and it's being magnified in order to garner public support for very specific policies.
Well, I think we're seeing propaganda unfold in real time, where that's why you see all these posts on Facebook from people talking about whatever you see on Fox News, this is what's actually happening in the city. Trying to give examples. And obviously, the Fox News people aren't going to listen to it or pay attention to it. So, what we have in America right now is the bell curve playing out, where 50% of people are intellectually deficient. I think that's the nice way to say it. And pretty much all those people identify as Republican, right wing, pro-fascist, anti-fascist, aka fascist, basically Nazis. So when we're talking about 50% of the country being okay with Nazis, if they don't straight up identify with Nazis, like those people who wore the mask with the swastika, not the peaceful Buddhist or Native American swastika. It was a Nazi swastika in Minnesota or some country that wasn't 1939 Germany. When you have Americans doing that, we have to acknowledge that this experiment has failed. And the First Amendment was never meant to protect Nazis, because obviously the First Amendment wasn't created when Nazis were existing. But I can guarantee even the fucking slave owners or racist ass people who were Americans fighting against the British wouldn't have been okay with using the First Amendment to protect Nazis. Even those people. Yeah. Which is where, again, it's like when we have mouth breathers and knuckle draggers today using the First Amendment to protect Nazis, and then trying to turn around and be like, oh, but you're a Democrat, you're a left winger, you shouldn't be okay with punching a Nazi in the face. No, we don't allow those people to define us, and then they don't get to define civility. So there's all these things about, yeah, it's okay to punch a Nazi because they're a fucking Nazi. Like,
yeah,
not to say, like, if you're in a grocery store or some shit, I don't know, man. If somebody was like around me and had a Nazi mask and was like brave enough to flaunt that shit in my face, well, consequences, motherfucker. Sorry. Because that's one of those things where you gotta, I'm not advocating violence, but I'm not saying I'm against punching a Nazi, because I'm not against punching Nazis. I'm okay with that 100%. And this is one of those things where I'm not going to let some fucking Republican try to make me feel bad for punching a Nazi or being okay with punching a Nazi, because we literally fought an entire fucking war where Nazis were killed because they're evil, evil fucking people. So punching them, that's like getting off that's like a get out of jail free card at this point in history. Like if they're just getting punched, and our military was ordered by Congress to kill Nazis at one point in history. So punching Nazis, that's like that's like a high five for them at this point. They should be like, hey, I'm giving you a high five instead of fucking what the government did to y'all. So that's where I think about Nazis in 2020, because that's like those people we shouldn't allow those people to call themselves American. Like, no, they should be enemies of the state at this point in time.
Seriously.
But because we have too many in our own government, that's why that's not happening.
Yeah, there are right-wing extremists in Germany who identify with neo-Nazi or neo-fascist philosophies, and they're not. I mean, they're sort of isolated within the country to a specific part of the country, but if people publicly display any actions that resonate or are related to or are throwbacks to Nazi Germany, typically the police arrest them. Like I remember there was an instance where there was a parade and one of the onlookers flashed a Nazi salute, and then the police just came right up to him and arrested him. Like they don't, in Germany, they don't even stand for that stuff anymore. So, in the United States, obviously it's a different case.
Which is why, why should the United States allow that when they don't even allow that shit in Germany?
Yeah. Well, we still have an incredible culture that wants to celebrate a 5-year period of treason. So it's well documented that the designer of the stainless banner, Mr. William Tapham, was a outspoken racist and white supremacist. And he was like on the record in multiple editorials talking about the stainless banner, about the white race and its superiority of and how the Confederacy would rise to the level of like a beacon for the white race. And this guy was like a actual legit scary dude in terms of the kind of ideas that he wanted to share and promoted. Let me see if I can find it.
There are also people who identify with the Confederate legacy who at the same time with their white supremacy also acknowledge and relate to neo-fascist right-wing Nazi ideology as well. So you'll have people with like garages full of memorabilia from that period of time, and that they just go out of their way to collect because they like it, because it reminds them of something that they enjoy. Literally, there are people in the United States who are getting off on reminiscing daily about these oppressive, dictatorial, supremacist, murderous regimes that were highly discriminatory and at the same time highly focused on propaganda and censorship. And they believe that because they identify with those ideals, that they should have just as much say in the public arena as people who literally like try and find a more egalitarian, open floor dialogue for the advancement of society, and an equitable approach to embracing diversity.
Yeah, man, it's like it's just a weird period. Because then we get to this point where diversity itself has hit this point of it's hard to know if somebody's like trying to use diversity to subvert the movement itself. So you got to really be careful about shit anymore, because like people on Facebook, well, not people, organizations will sell Black Lives Matter swag and be actually like a right wing organization or some shit, and you think you're supporting Black Lives Matter, and you're actually fucking giving money to a right wing organization, and they're laughing about it the whole time. It's that same shit. Um, there's so much deception in American culture that even when you're trying to support diversity, you almost have to like vet what you're doing to make sure you're actually supporting diversity in the process and not succumbing to just another American fucking CIA devil trick. Because that's like, man, I wonder how much American culture is just directly funded by the CIA. And then obviously they like hide it in transactions, but you know, we know about Jackson Pollock. We know about what the fucking Grateful Dead. There's like so many things where we get like, what did any fucking deadhead ever do to change the world? Let's be honest. What did any deadhead ever do to fucking change the world? Drugs?
Yeah, driving that train high on cocaine.
Got fucked up? Had a lot of fucking risky sex? Okay. Check. Anything else? Yeah, I'm sure somebody can point at a couple little fundraisers here and there that they probably got super fucked up while doing. But anything of like major note in the history of all deadheads who identify themselves as deadheads, by the way, like what self-respecting person, especially in the context of trying to be what was then the old version of woke, you're dead, your head is dead. That's supposed to be the most alert, alive part of your body, but you're calling yourself a deadhead. That's some CIA bullshit right there. And that's where, again, when you get people to actively destroy their own psyches and constructs for capacity to build themselves, like
Baheen says that the Deadheads created Silicon Valley.
no, they didn't create Silicon Valley. No,
No,
fuck
I know.
no.
I know.
No, I'm gonna give Deadheads credit for that, because that's one thing where I know what's the name. Steve Jobs said he was very much what's it called, motivated by LSD and his experiences and the Beatles. But if we can't say the Deadheads, because like that's like
Steve
ignoring
Jobs and Steve Wozniak were definitely not deadheads. They were like very very business oriented. They had
Yeah.
no time for Grateful Dead culture.
No,
Steve Jobs drove around a custom Mercedes with no license plate because Apple owned so much land between where he lived and their corporate headquarters that he didn't actually drive on public roads. He didn't have a fucking license. He just drove his car on private roads. Apparently, he got pulled over one time, and then he told the police officer to get off his property.
Yeah, because like really, Silicon Valley is like a product of the government. I mean, that's like Xerox Park getting invested in with the ARPANET project, and you know, yeah, that's not. Again, that's not deadheads. That's the government investing in shit, and then using media to build narratives around people. Once again, and that's one of these crazy things where when you find out how much the government invested in what we now know as the internet and basically subsidize companies to then make money off of us. Capitalism is fucking stupid. It's like a snake eating its own tail, thinking that it's having the best meal ever. It's really crazy how stupid capitalism is at the end of the day. It doesn't make any mathematical sense. Yeah. And part of it, well, the whole reason I'm framing it like that is because when we're talking about a government that's effectively using its power and capital to find ways to exploit its own people and then use the guise and the religion of capitalism to make those people feel like they're then unique and individuals when they buy their shit off a shelf, it's like one of the worst cults on the planet when you really look at what's happening, especially when you see how many people have to turn to fucking sex work to subsist.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is not working. This shit is not working. And it's like one of the reasons I'm so anti-capitalism is because capitalism is just a euphemism for slavery. And when you have a historical understanding of how slavery was transitioned into the system we know now, it's impossible just not to fucking hate the living shit out of this entire system. It's meant to subjugate people and then use the media to pretend those people aren't being subjugated and then steal their voices. Like, there's a reason Big Mouth is replacing all of their characters with actual people of color. Well, not all of them. The ones that had non-stereotypical stories, because the couple actual people of color they had on the show were playing stereotypes. And then the other people of color were played by non-people of color. So that's not the only instance, but there's all these things happening where Black, indigenous people of color, and other minorities, especially women, were not being able to write and tell their own stories. And the stories were being written to subjugate those people in everyone's mind. So then you could say they're free, even though they're actually being subjugated by the system. As long as there's no visible shackles and visible chains, we can call those people free, even though we all know women don't make the same amount of money for doing the same work a man does.
Yeah.
In almost any case. So is that person equal? Of course not. Is that person being subjugated? Yes. But we don't want to acknowledge these things because then that compels a person to change or acknowledge that they've accepted the system. And that's what the previous generation kind of did. And then they wanted to blame the hippies. Well, I don't even, again, I don't know how much like the hippies actually wanted to change and just use that shit as an excuse to party. I wasn't there, so I can't condemn them. But when you allow your goal to be undermined by either an outside party or the group's own inability to stop getting fucked up, then I'm not sure how serious those people were about it anyway. And that's like, you have a lot of kids right now. They haven't even voted yet, and they're going out getting tear gas to fight fascism. They haven't, they're not doing it as an excuse to get fucked up. They're not doing it as an excuse to go get laid. They are legitimately anti-fascist, and they haven't even voted yet. So I'm not sure if we've ever even seen anything remotely close to that in America, because the Flower Children, they were cool. They did a lot of drugs.
Their movement, I'm not sure if we can really say that their movement succeeded.
No, it definitely didn't. It definitely didn't. It failed miserably.
I think it changed a few things. I think it may have.
I was trying to be nice about it, but let's just say it, their movement failed miserably.
Well, look at where we are now.
The drugs.
Well, the flower children, the hippie generation, they voiced a desire for a different paradigm, but I think where they failed was organizationally.
Yep.
And because they didn't organize in the most effective and cohesive ways, and they were largely focused on, it seems, at least in retrospect, hedonistic pursuits.
Yep.
Then they ended up falling into a position where it became obvious that capitalism was not in any way affected by their activities, their actions, or any of their ideas. And that combined with the federal government's initiatives to infiltrate any organizations that might lend themselves to constructive forward movement and pressure from the grassroots direction. Basically, it left the flower generation or the hippie generation with the need and the inherent necessity to get jobs that were created by the capitalist framework and to basically get absorbed into the economic structure and largely become the image of what they were rebelling against. So it was sort of a flash in the pan. It's something nice to make a movie about, but even so, it's sort of been done to death. I mean, that paradigm doesn't hold true anymore. It's been co-opted by profiteering. You know, you have all these festivals, these music festivals where people dress up to look like flower children, whereas their parents are like, you know, investment bankers or work in, you know, tech, or, you know, they think those things are like cute because they saw them when they were growing up, or their parents saw them when they were growing up, or they saw it on TV. So they're like, oh yeah, my kid likes to go to music events and put flower wreaths on and dance around to, you know, interesting music. But that's not really changing anything. I mean, a lot of these music festivals, I don't know how many of them are nonprofit. I don't know how they break down their finances or if they contribute to any particular egalitarian causes, but I imagine that a lot of the promotions are for profit and they're private. So kind of defeats the purpose. It becomes very cosmetic and superficial.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is spot on, because when the end result is just money in somebody's pocket, the entire experience gets undermined. In that, yeah, it's not enlightening anyone when it just results in money in somebody's pocket. That's not nothing. Some people may find a joyous experience, but that's not enlightenment. And it's selling people this lie of enlightenment by taking a bunch of hits of acid or X and fucking seeing some light show and having the bass hit you and making you think you saw God. And there, yeah, thanks for your $50. Here, you come do it again next week. Come see God again. It's like church for people who don't want to, you know, they don't want to go to church, but they want to have these religious experiences, but they also want to be able to not fucking pursue higher self 6 out of the 7 days of the week. And then they want to find it on the weekend. It's like weekend spiritual warriors, basically. And that's like, when capitalism tells you can find it at a rave or at a show or at a whatever just one time, it's like, you know, I can say I went to a shitload of raves in my life, and there was only really a couple times where it was like a truly nirvanic experience compared to just me being infatuated with the bass or infatuated with the environment. You can really induce yourself into a spiritual perspective when something's not actually spiritual. That doesn't invalidate the experience, but when you do that, that's not actually necessarily the space and the environment and the event being a spiritual thing. And that's where when people let themselves be deluded about those things, then they end up with this thing where it's like, oh, I think I was in love one time. I don't remember, but it was in a Walmart bathroom. I think you know, those people end up thinking they see God at a fucking rave on 10 hits of ecstasy because that's the closest thing they ever got to trying to find God. And that's like a delusion capitalism lets people have because they just want to sell the drug and sell the ticket.
Well, the capitalistic framework has also heavily affected and determined the growth of the drug industry. Synthetics cost money. It's a profit structure. People are supposed to buy them in order to use them. Narcotics, the same thing. Any drug basically that somebody purchases is part of a larger business framework, and that in and of itself is an exploitative capitalistic structure that they are then supporting or buying into in order to have their nirvanic experience. So it's all highly manufactured.
You know, this even goes back to the fucking 99 theses where it's like, you can't buy salvation. You just can't. Fucking Martin Luther got that shit. The church has been trying to sell salvation for a very long time. Then
the indulgences.
Yeah, it just got adopted into other things where you get a hedonistic experience and then told that you're getting a spiritual experience because you're really feeling that lower cinnabar region and that lower self and thinking that's a spiritual experience, not understanding that that's like only part of your being. And I think when, you know, it's really crazy how much this culture lets people revel in that lower region and thinking and convinces them that's their entire being. Like your entire being is focused in your pelvis. Doesn't matter what sex you are, your entire being is focused in your pelvis, and everything, all your thoughts need to come from your pelvis.
Not just that, but when you want to be a part of something, you just go to the mall and you buy your hippie starter kit, your festival season starter kit, your goth starter kit, your industrial music subculture starter kit. You can buy into a subculture. That's like antithetical to a subculture. I feel like. I feel like those things eventually that always happens because we live in a capitalistic society. But a lot of counterculture emerges in opposition to consumerism. They have to piece together their style, their look, that whole thing, and then it's only after the counterculture matures enough that we find the style now exists in stores.
So when you're talking about the commercialization of those types of styles, I mean, even the flower child generation or the hippie generation, they were heavily influenced by religions that also use naturally occurring substances in order to elevate their minds or change their consciousness while they're performing religious practices. So it's also important to understand and consider the approaches that some religions that predate even Christianity or some of the Judeo-Christian practices or were developed maybe at around the same time as certain Semitic religious traditions. That there are religions that incorporate taking certain substances into their bodies that are grown or can be fermented in order to produce what they believe or what they feel is an elevated state of consciousness that then they don't necessarily seek to satisfy a physical urge through it, but they seek to perform maybe complex spiritual analysis by using it. And then that idea was sort of stripped down to its most basic component parts in order to apply it to a certain aspect of profitability.
Yeah, that's spot on because again, when you're talking about these experiences and the way they're using it, it's not to satisfy hedonistic urge. It's to face something real and find an answer or seek a new um, perspective, and not just to please that feeling or need to get fucked up. Which is there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but when they're conflated, they are nothing. They are not the same at all, and that's how you end up with people chasing that dragon of thinking, oh, this religious experience, I just need, oh, it took 2 hits last time, maybe I need 4 hits this time. Thinking, again, they didn't realize they convinced themselves to have this spiritual experience, and there was never actually a spiritual experience there.
I've always thought it was amusing that there is a culture that is really keen on expanding the mind through taking substances, because most of the time those things don't do that. They just it's just an illusion. There's no faster. The worst part is like it's almost like people want it to be a fast track to enlightenment.
That's exactly what they want it to be.
But the
Even
but the problem is that everyone's taking the same path to enlightenment. They're not going to find enlightenment. They're going to find the thing at the end of the road of where what that path leads to, and it's the same thing for everyone. Eventually, some people are just faster at getting to the end, but you can't find your way through the universe by following somebody else's map or guide. It just doesn't work like that.
That reminds me of the ayahuasca trend, like people
God.
going on retreats and seeking to have the trip. And I believe, there are some people who find it to be therapeutic. I think that there are some people who are able to have a positive effect from it. But at the same time, if somebody is using that as the only defining characteristic of their journey, then they're always going to end up relying on external input as opposed to generating it from within themselves.
Yeah, that was a weird rich person trend that I was thinking it was one of those, basically indigenous peoples getting reparations through selling fake experiences to the Westerners. That's kind of what it turned out to be because a lot of that shit was super hollow. And then you find out that they were basically like a lot of them were cults. Um, so it's not there's nothing, no commentary on the actual experiences with high ayahuasca being invalid or anything like that, but the way that they were doing them was definitely not uh, looking to be genuine about their approach, and it was definitely like a disingenuous, exploitative way to steal people's money and get them in a place where they could be exploited.
And pretend to be part of somebody else's culture.
Yep.
That's the big part. I think that there are actually a lot of people who think that they can just go don their flower child garb or their festival garb and become part of the counterculture. But it's much more than that. It's like they're simulating the behaviors. They're mimicking the behaviors. But at the end of the day, when somebody takes off their costume and goes back to their 9 to 5, there's a social component to it too that just can't be faked.
Also, it's like, I feel like the whole 9 to 5 structure is probably one of the most counterproductive forced frameworks that probably leads to a lot of the stress that people end up experiencing and building up and bottling up until they feel the need to pursue something like hallucinogens in order to help them cope with the extraordinary amounts of stress that, a 40 to 60 to 80-hour work week provides them with because they're trapped in that capitalistic structure. But then they end up saving up all their money so that they can
Go do
have
drugs in
this
the woods.
experience and then basically come back to the same thing that they were doing before. You know what I mean?
You know,
Yeah, and
they make
sorry.
they make fun of people taking drugs to expand their mind in the first season of Silicon Valley, and uh, you know, I can't remember what his name is now, but
It was Ehrlich Bachman.
yeah, Ehrlich Bachman. He's like he eats a bag of mushrooms and he's on his way out to the desert. And in his mind, he's sitting in the desert having this like incredible, eye-opening, mind-opening idea session. And as the sun sets, and the reality, he is crapping all over himself in a bathroom on the side of the highway.
While muttering, making the world a better place.
Yeah, like
And that's how they. Well, not that specific instance, but because that guy ended up having problems with what's his name, TJ something, ended up having problems with people making the show. They wrote him off and had him basically smoke himself into like a coma.
yeah, he's in an opium.
Yeah, he was in an opium den, and just they wrote him off the show in an opium den, which is fitting, but also a lot of commentary about that culture.
Yeah, I really liked his character, but when they when they put him in the opium sleep, the opium slumber, yeah, I agree completely. That's kind of the end of the road with almost all drug culture. It robs you of your mind, and it tricks you into thinking that you have, more. That that in that those moments that you can't even hold on to, you're somehow seeing deep into the nexus of time and reality, and you'll be able to walk away with some of the knowledge. But the only people I've ever known who came back talking about the same things that they were babbling on about when they were out of their gourd were the people who entered a variation of drug induced psychosis. And a lot of those people are dead.
Yeah, I knew a few people who ended up having to go into the ward after some drug trips and shit, where you're like, man, some people make it seem as if they may never come back, and that shit is
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
Where if you never see that shit in person, you're lucky, but when you see it, it definitely um, keeps you from ever wanting to do anything remotely close to that shit, because that's some scary shit when somebody goes to a party and then a week later they're in a psych ward because of that party, and that shit happened way too often. I
Or
know it's in
people
my circle, but
people jumping off of balconies, people freaking out and jumping like off of a high floor of an apartment building. That shit was real. People jumping off of parking garages because they were out of their mind. I mean, people stepping out into the street in front of moving buses because they believed that they were invincible. A bus will always beat a human. I mean, always. I wonder how much a city bus weighs. Curb weight, 44,000 pounds. 44,000 pounds.
People getting these weird, mindsets because of the
On the light end, they're 20,000 pounds.
the
So,
intersection of capitalism and bad drugs will put people in a very a place where they think they're invincible because they bought invincibility.
what kind of physical realm would we exist in where an object with 1% of the mass would be able to contend with the object with 100% of the mass? Like,
That's called the DC universe.
oh yeah.
It's called the universe of psychotic delusions.
Or the Marvel universe. One of either DC or Marvel. Obviously, there's independent comics, but nobody cares about those right now. So
it's imaginary. It only exists in their mind, and that's why it doesn't work in reality.
Maybe they've seen too many kung fu movies. No, not even a kung fu
And
movie.
I watched so many kung fu movies and anime as a kid. It's like there's like a part of you that wants to believe that you'll learn some shit that Ryu learned and be able to throw a fireball. But most of you believe like ends up realizing like yeah, that shit's not real. It's like as a kid you can entertain that type of shit, but that's where the drugs then allow people to start entertaining those types of thoughts
Yeah.
as reality, and that's just dangerous. That's super dangerous.
Periodically I still, enter a half squat and then stand up really quick and throw my fist straight up into the air, up and away, because the one time that it works, I'm going to be really pleased with myself.
It just takes one time.
It just takes one time for it to work, but so far it's never worked.
It didn't even work at the end of the fucking movie.
I know.
So shit. If Ryu couldn't get it to work in the movie, who are we?
Yeah,
Well, that's where you get into that whole no touch key blast martial arts stuff.
Right.
Oh, with the finger point that knocks people out.
Yeah, or people literally launching chi balls at each other and trying to knock each other over with it as a form of self-defense.
And there's something to this in that it's not like magic or anything, but if you yell, if you're loud enough, you can stun somebody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The ki is a real thing. You can actually unsettle somebody, or throw somebody's balance off or timing off, or even project sound in a concentrated way.
It's not even about being concentrated. It's like it's the same principle as a flashbang. If somebody is like not expecting a loud sound and you loud sound, it catches them off guard. Their body just has a physical reaction that they can't control. It's like one of those things like you have to train it away.
Yeah.
You're going to react. It's not magic. It's just somebody taps you on your fucking knee. Unless you've trained 10,000 times to not react, your knee's gonna fucking snap up. It's just one of those things you can't do anything. But it has to be loud enough. You have to cross the threshold. So it's not even about the sound has to be perfectly concentrated in this one area. Like no, this has to be loud. Period. But most people, what I realized at a certain age, well, it wasn't even an age. I took a test. Everybody has different lung capacities. Like taller people generally have larger lung capacities than shorter people because they need more oxygen to saturate their blood. Therefore, their lungs are bigger. My lungs are basically for somebody who's like 6'2" or some shit. So my lung capacity compared to my body size is actually disproportionately high. Everyone doesn't have that same genetic variation. So if I yelled in somebody's face, it's gonna be louder, or it's gonna be as if I was a 6'2" person or 6'3" person because my lung capacity does not match my height or in my proportion. So I'm actually gonna be able to produce a louder sound. And if I try to tell somebody else that they can do that same shit, they just can't do it unless they have my same lung capacity.
Well,
so there's all things like an opera singer generally probably has a bigger lung capacity than a non-opera singer, which is why they can fill an entire auditorium without microphones.
So, in addition to that, you have a deep voice, and Daniel has a deep voice, and I have a deep voice, but none of us are the same height. And what that means is that our vocal cords are all different lengths and different thicknesses. So this will also come into play to the kind of volume that somebody can create. Lungs, diaphragm, your all of the piping between your lungs and your mouth, the shape of the mouth. All this stuff will act as in a sense, a megaphone. And I mean, I've met people who were real big and tall who had high pitched voices, and it wasn't because they weren't manly or because they talked like a child. It was because of the physical structure of their vocal folds.
Yeah, because again, it's like they did that episode of Mythbusters where you can break glass with the voice. It just has to be at the right pitch and the right intensity, and the right loudness. So, or at the least loudness, there's a threshold to cross to do it. So there's all these things.
The resonant frequency of the glass also comes into
Yeah,
play.
exactly. It has to be the same resonant frequency of the glass. There's all these things. So if you can hit somebody, like just happen to hit somebody's resonant frequency in their eardrums, you can bust somebody's eardrums by shrieking at them or yelling at them.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be a fucking science unless you do that shit for a very, very, very long time. And it's not going to be magic even at the end of that.
Saw a video of a fellow who trained his body to be able to throw sound into objects and make them resonate. So he was like standing at various distances from, I think it was a bell of some kind or a resonant bowl of some kind, and he could make it resonate and give off sound after making certain noises. It's pretty interesting.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah, because again, it's like, you know, I've been able to figure out. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that Jack Tenacious D track where he does the inward singing bit. But effectively, if you vibrate your vocal cords by inhaling instead of exhaling, you can make everything outside resonate if you can find the right frequency. And it's actually a lot easier to make things vibrate using inward singing than external singing, I've found, in a way that was not expected. So it's like I think when you're creating sound shadows, but you're also making sound, then it does something different versus just trying to fill the room with the actual waves. Because it's like, I wonder if it's like I'm making myself resonate at the same frequency that I'm putting out first. So there's something to it for sure. But no, I know those things are definitely not only possible, but again, it's not magic. It's just we don't understand our physics in a way that allow people to express what's happening scientifically yet.
That's the whole magic of science. We don't understand concept.
We're just at that gap where obviously there's some sort of fluid dynamics happening.
Yeah.
Obviously, but what exact fluid dynamics are happening? Yeah, we're not going to be able to tell until we can fill the room with fucking smoke or nanites or some shit or something to be able to measure every single spot in the room to know what's happening. And that's not far off, but you know, NASA can probably do some shit like that right now. But it'd just be a matter of getting them to find a reason to do it. It's not like NASA has like a reason to study that right now.
Yeah.
NASA, in their minds. So
well, I think that if we can imagine just imagine a course of research, it can be done. For the
yeah, totally. If we can imagine it, they can do it. They just don't necessarily have a reason as to why when people...
They might have to invent the technology to do it. They might have to invent some kind of sensor or hardware somewhere along the way, but...
They have to have a reason first.
Yeah.
And that's where all this, like... Not even us. Like, when people are speculating about what could be and what is potential for technology, that's all there. That's always there. But the scientists that get funding have to justify their funding. So they really have to have a good reason as to what they're going to be doing. And that's why you just can't get like NASA searching for ancient aliens.
So speaking of having a good reason to do something, there's this game Minecraft. It's a simulated world that you get to build things out of blocks. It's kind of like virtual Legos, and you're a little dude running around inside a game building stuff with your pickaxe, and sometimes you have other tools. Well, apparently a group of, and I'm going to say computer nerds, because I don't see how this has any real world practical application, but a group of computer nerds, and I mean that with the highest regard, they've been working on a virtual environment in Minecraft. So you put a block on your desk and it represents a computer, and then you install an operating system, like various images of Linux, or in this case, Windows 95. So a 25-year-old operating system can now run inside of a game inside of a modern operating system. And within this installation of Windows 95, somebody installed the game Doom, like that the classic first-person shooter that came after Wolfenstein 3D, and in a lot of ways changed the way that we game. Because I don't know anybody who didn't play Doom. And then so it's here we are in this place, and I put it up in the description of today's show. It's it's a dude playing a game on a computer as a dude in a game, being played by a dude in a game on a computer. And this rises to the level of Tropic Thunder, but a virtualized virtual environment is what's going on here. There's some crazy simulation stuff going on. Not to say that Minecraft is actually a representative simulation yet, but this is a kind of an interesting foundation for that kind of world within a world. It's like it's an Inception game now.
There's actually a VR experience where you are in a bedroom and you have a television and there's like a gaming system. You can either watch Saturday morning cartoons or play video games on the gaming system. So it's this weird like meta um, nostalgia using modern technology to insert yourself into a virtual environment that's supposed to be your, I mean, not your, but a kid's bedroom to then relive the experience of watching Saturday morning cartoons on a virtual television or playing a virtual game system. So we're in this weird meta existence right now in 2020.
You can make it even more meta by having a virtual machine installed on your actual machine and opening Minecraft through the virtual machine and then virtually playing Doom through your virtual machine on Minecraft.
Or have it on a remote server. Because again, we're getting onto this whole, we're in a super meta time. And I think that's why when we start to create these sub universes that are within universes, within other universes, our fractal design nature is something that's also found in nature. But then that's where it's this element of like, are we just manifesting the thing that was already there, or is this just our window into that thing that was already there, or are we actually creating it? And I think we're hitting those points of like, it's almost difficult to distinguish, because when you look at like things, for example, like comic book mythos, at a certain point it really feels like people are creating comic books, but now it feels like we're just looking into universes that are actually existing, because either they're being designed really well, or we're just actually looking into alternate universes, and this is how we do it in this universe. Well, that's like one thing that people aren't even considering is like, how do you interact with different universes? Maybe that's through the idea of creating stories, or what you think are stories, but that's actually telling tales of different universes or different parts of the multiverse, rather.
So eventually, well, I'm assuming, but eventually there will be a virtual reality Minecraft, and it'll stop looking like blocks. It'll start looking realistic.
I think they're gonna keep that aesthetic.
Oh, I'm not saying Minecraft specifically, but it'll be something like that.
Yeah. Oh, there's
and you'll be able to interact with other toons that are the result of scanning yourself, so they'll look like you, or they'll look like whatever you want to look like. And I think there's a movie called with Bruce Willis in it. It was called Surrogates, where everyone's sitting around they're laying around in their room in a chair hooked up to a machine that looks like them and walks around on the real world and engages in reality for them. And so when they get shot, they just leak green fluid. But there's a variation of that where it's all just virtualized and it looks real, but it doesn't need to be real because we're going to have shit shipped to our doors anyways. And so at some point, there will be a virtual environment where you lay down on your interface and you activate in internet world and you go to work and you sit down at a desk and you type at your computer and it all looks like normal. Essentially, we're talking about the Matrix. And I think that at a point you will be able to play games like Minecraft in that Matrix world. And I don't think it's that far off, and I don't think it involves sticking a 6-inch metal pin into your head either.
No, most certainly not. And it's funny because I think what you just described is definitely possible in that when people describe it, then they're like, well, why did somebody need to do all that to then go sit at a computer? And then it's like, well, somebody needs to design the games for in that world where, where better to do it than in that world.
Yeah. Designing.
So there's elements of like, then if you can also design using code by just using your brain waves without like, this is when we start to getting into these drifts of like how you start to see the human body waste away because we're able to design things that allow us to directly interact with reality instead of needing our physical muscles, which is obviously when people realize like, yeah, we're just a meat Gundam. That's like, the less we need the Gundam, the more we can just be the brain operating the meat Gundam. That's what has been theorized in a lot of science fiction. But the whole thing is, if it's about aesthetics, yeah, we can just figure out ways to keep the meat Gundam intact. So then when you get out of the machine, and you've been having electro shock therapy on your muscles to make sure that you don't have atrophy, and in fact you'll lose fat and then come out with the 6-pack abs you always wanted.
Well,
by laying in a machine. It's like if we want these things, we can design that shit.
The machine in the Matrix said it pretty succinctly. Your flesh is a relic of your vessel. It's just a container, and in that virtual environment, it doesn't mean anything unless somebody goes and pulls your plug and kills you.
I heard that same analogy at a funeral before I ever heard it in the Matrix, which is funny.
That's interesting. That's actually really interesting.
It's true.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we take for granted is that in that environment, you don't age. You're as young as your mind is limber and agile. And there's I mean, fuck, sign me up. I want to go into the Matrix. I want to check it out. I don't want to stay there. I don't want to be a battery for a robot, but I'd like to see what a realistic simulation environment is like. I think it'd be pretty interesting. But that's like
that reminds me of two things. One, it's the projections for the evolution of humans. There's multiple paths we can go down. I think Chris is onto something in regards to there will be mechanisms if we develop that technology, and it seems like we're on that path, but there will be mechanisms to keep the body in a state of tonus and maintain metabolic activity in order to prevent the degradation of the human body. But that also may lead to various evolutionary advantages in terms of cognition. And if we don't necessarily rely on our bodies as much anymore, the other path we go down is that humans would eventually evolve to not necessarily have, dominant physical characteristics because they wouldn't necessarily need them anymore because everything's being projected from the mind into the computer. And then on a more comedic note, it makes me think of, the paradigm of being used as a battery. Well, what if we have to deal with people who are using humans for, cryptocurrency mining whenever they're plugged into the machine, things like that. That idea in and of itself just sounds like another possibility. If a machine can use a human for energy, then, what could that energy be used for?
They already designed that in 2018, actually. So anybody listening can go Google use your body heat to mine cryptocurrency. Someone actually already designed um, that machine.
What exactly is wrong with human evolution leading us to a place where our limbs are vestigial and we don't really need our eyes and we just have like a feeding tube and a cloaca of sorts, and we have machines to do all sorts of things, and we're suspended
Well,
in fluid.
it offends our modern sensibilities because we're in a post hunting and gathering, pre technological age where we also have heavy indoctrination about beauty aesthetics and preferences. So, by the time we actually are evolved enough as a species to be doing that shit, we'll probably won't even care what people look like. We'll say, yeah, you can look like whatever the fuck you want.
Well, that's what I
And just be
mean.
a floating head that's just a big ass brain and nobody's going to judge you and you can still get laid if you want to. But we're actually not thinking about getting laid because we all live to 30,000 years now and nobody actually needs to procreate anymore. So
Well,
why are you thinking about getting laid when we can go explore the universe?
I mean, I think
Like,
at that point, if somebody wants to get laid, they can just go load up the porno program and
right,
get stimulated.
yeah.
And you could have a lifetime worth of stimulation in a matter of moments and then move on with your life and go do something more interesting.
And the organization that, or at least one of the organizations working on using human body heat to mine Bitcoin, is called the Institute of Human Obsolescence.
Ooh.
That's funny. Yeah, that's not surprising. Um, but again, I'm not saying if I live for 30,000 years, I would not still want, whatever. But it's like there are just certain things that humans tend to not extrapolate. Like if you can live for 30,000 years, why do you need to have a kid? To take care of you.
Yeah, I think if you can live to 30,000 years as a brain in a tank, you've got machines.
You
That
could be like that character from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Krang,
I believe so.
yeah, Krang was an all-powerful interdimensional being and that rode around in a robot inside the robot's abdomen.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I feel like there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's not a malevolent entity.
Absolutely.
And if I could live for 30,000 years and travel through space and all I had to do was chill out in my tank and I could interact with other t- tank brains through the I'm not even sure what kind of network we would describe it. The brain net. That's cool. I'm down with that. But I think that I think Chris actually raised a really good point. Is that we're not ready for that, and our human civilization is so wrapped up in these quantifiable metrics of beauty and attractiveness and demonstrations of wealth or um, opulent experience that the idea of living forever. You know what? Actually, I don't think that people can live forever. I think most people would end up going crazy. Most of the people that I've encountered, I think that we've been pretty well socialized to accept a limited period of time on this earth. Like my dad says he plans on living to 100, and most of the people in my parents' side, my parents' family, are pretty long lived. So I expect to live, at least into my 90s. Assuming I don't experience some kind of horrible accident. But we've got a society of people that have a lower life expectancy. If the average, let's see, what's the national average? Life expectancy in this country is up to 78 years now, and that's between men and women. Um, when I was younger, it was lower. So people are living a little bit longer. They're living about 4 years longer now than before. But this actually says a zero point zero 0.03 decline from 2016. So what do I know? Um, but that means that if if people in my family lived well into their 90s, another 12 years, get up to 22 years, get into a 100-year range. Um, that means that people are dying in their 50s, and if people are dying in their 50s, that I mean, I'm assuming that there's a component of that would be risk-taking behavior, but there could also be genetics involved, or the yellow. Hmm. Do you want me to plug? Oh, I can't find my other cable. Do you want the number for the to dial in? Do you want the number to call in? So here, I'll send it in a wait. I'll see what I can do. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties here. Let's see if I can get this computer system situation to work out. Anyways, where was it? Oh yeah. So people aren't living that long. There, at least there's a portion of the population that doesn't live that long, and this is probably the case. There's probably a generational component to this as well. I imagine that people who come from short-lived bloodlines or family lines have similar conditions. I could be completely wrong, of course, but I think that if someone comes from a family line that only lives 50 years on average, that's like multiple generations happen within a century, and I think, let's see, I think my great grandmother was born at the end of the 1800s, and I'm pretty sure that my grandmother was born like in the 19 teens, and she died somewhat recently. Um, so I can go back my parents, grandma, great grandma, three generations is into 100 years ago. But for parents were like somebody whose parents are 50 when they die, and they're in their 30s, that means their parents were like 20 when they were born, and of course, life expectancies weren't as long if you go further back. So it might have taken 4 or 5 generations for that family line to go back into the 1800s, and that's a lot actually. That's a fairly frequent. I think that's like a high frequency of reproduction at that point. I feel like that's got to be problematic, at least for like in terms of maintaining some kind of lasting memory of events, or well, in the case of the pandemic right now, for somebody to have been alive during the Kansas flu of 1918 and actually have any working memory of what it was like, they would have been born in like 1912, 1913, so they'd be 107 years old at this point.
Jesus, yeah, there's no way their memories are accurate.
And on top of that, I'm pretty sure that if if they have kids, their kids were born afterwards. They might have still been alive during the 44 years of polio, but even the people who would have had polio, let's say that somebody was lived through polio and they knew people who had polio, and they got the vaccine in 1944 just like anyone else, and similar conditions, about 7 years to start forming real memories. So what's that? That's 1937. So they would have lived through World War II, but they wouldn't remember any of it, and they would just start forming memories right as the polio vaccine is delivered. So they might have met people who had polio, but they wouldn't have gotten polio. So to go back even further, because you'd have to go back into like the 30s or even the 20s to really have an idea of what's going on with polio, where they had seasonal shutdowns and of various services or systems libraries and pools got shut down in the summer because it's polio season. Um, Massive outbreaks, all an entire city's economy would be shut down because fucking polio's on the loose. It's rampant. There were no cure, and so we're still talking about people that would be close to 100 years old to get a real accurate reflection of what life was like during polio when the polio epidemic was in full effect, and 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 somebody whose family line only lives, they top out in their 50s. Nobody from that family line is going to be alive to talk about it. No one.
Well, we also have a culture in the United States of displacing our elders and not necessarily keeping them with us in our homes, but isolating them in locations that are managed care facilities. So even if a family had somebody who could remember that generation or that period of time and share any warnings or any specific anecdotes about how to live safely during that period of time, they wouldn't necessarily be listened to or brought into the equation because I don't feel like there's a lot of equitable treatment of elders in this country.
Well, most definitely not. Elders get treated like absolute throwaway pieces of shit by society, and it's really unfortunate for a lot of reasons. But the biggest being obviously those people, I think, they came out of a time when humans were just really learning ethics on a large scale, I think, because if you look at pre let's go just call it pre-medicine that's available, kids, you can't get attached to your kids because they're probably going to die. Like, they had a really good chance of dying before they ever became adults, so you just have to look at them like workers in the field. So until we got to a point where you can actually start to get attached to your kids, society is just not really about being nice to each other in general. So I think there's this element of, everybody is exploiting because that's what you have to do. And we're basically coming out of being exposed to nature and the chaos of the universe without society's protection. And then when we have society's protection, there are people who would act as if we're supposed to fend for ourselves when we establish society and civilizations for the very explicit purpose of protecting the lowest and sure nobody fell through a safety net.
So Mill published On Liberty in 1859. So that's 160 years ago. I mean, utilitarianism is only 160.
Yep, it's really not that old.
I don't think that humanity has even. I'm pretty sure that you have to take an ethics class to be required to read that book. But I doubt that people are just going out and reading On Liberty on their own.
No way.
I mean, so without exposure to those kinds of ideas, one might be able to glean some of those ideas and maybe apply some of them to their every day-to-day life, or they might stumble upon some of those ideas on their own. But without some guidance, you're not going to just divine utilitarianism.
Well, we also want to consider what has become the overarching goal for having children in this generation, or even one generation before. What was the expectation? Was the expectation for the child to take care of you later in life? Were you creating a caretaker that you would funnel your resources into over time, or in which case is that why people were focusing on their kids getting the best grades possible so that they could get the best opportunity possible, because capitalism has only so many slots for people to end up exploiting for their own personal gain, and then funneling those resources into their own family, or are people just procreating for the sake of procreation? Like, what is the actual end game for creating life now, and how is that guiding the determination of our collective goals?
I'm pretty sure people just procreate because that's what they do. Some people are rabbits. They want to fuck, and having kids is part of that.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel like there's a whole lot of intention happening with it. It's just some sort of byproduct of people being horny. So I don't really. I feel like if there was actual intention behind it, society wouldn't be arguing about sending teachers to their death. We'd have a more aware society that would have a solution that wouldn't result in teacher or student's death from ignoring a pandemic if there was more thought into reproduction. Sorry.
COVID is so dangerous that guys like Roger Stone and Michael Cohen and all of the people who got a judgment against them from the administration, it's too dangerous for them to be in prison. But it's not dangerous enough to prevent teachers and children from going into schools.
It's also not dangerous enough to let people out of other prison facilities, because people by the thousands in California in those incarceration facilities are
San Quentin, there was
getting COVID and they're not getting let out.
Yeah, they're not getting let out at all. I hear that there are some people that are let out of prison so that they can work, but they got to go back in as soon as it's safe to go back to prison.
Well, and then I don't know if people realize, like, prisoners that work, quote unquote, get paid between 14 and 50 cents per hour. Yeah. Not dollars, cents. So you tell me if slavery actually ended.
Well, and then if the prisoners aren't, if the certain number of prisoners aren't met by the state, then the state owes money to the prison industrial complex, like on the order of millions of dollars.
Yep, because that happened in Colorado after they legalized weed, and this is one of those reasons that black people are still being disproportionately locked up for marijuana-related crimes, while other companies are making billions of dollars selling pot legally and selling stocks in the companies and shit. And it's like, man, I can't stand this country. I hate this country so much, but it's in my blood, unfortunately, so I have to fucking help make it better. It's one of those things I can't run away from something that's in my blood. It's like, as black as I am, I'm still American as fuck at the end of the day. Whether they want to call me African first or not, African's in my blood too, and I'm African at heart. But at the end of the day, my birth certificate says American on it. Ain't no motherfucker gonna tell me I have to be okay with some bullshit, and it's my responsibility to make sure it ain't some bullshit either. I can't just run away from it. So,
I saw this meme. It was a person talking to a black person and saying, "Well, how do you, as a person of color?" And then the black person says, "I'm black." And he's like, "Well, aren't you also a person of color?" She said, "No, I'm black." He's like, "But what do you?" And then they interrupt the person and says, "Blackety blackety blackety black." I think that it's important that we have the term ethnic minority. We just call them minorities in this country. Really, everyone. I'm a minority. I don't think we need another blanket to throw over an entire group of people. If people are trying to be like extra, what's the word? Politically correct, and I'm all for some political correctness, but I think that if entire groups of people are losing their identity and being called something else just to make somebody else comfortable, then that's kind of a step in the wrong direction. I'm Asian. I'm Asian American. I'm Chinese American, but I'm also American. And so I don't think that I don't think that's a big deal to call me any of those things. I don't think it's a big deal to call you black or American or a black American man. These are just ways to describe people. But it seems to be, I mean, obviously we're in a very sensitive time and place in history, and physical location and social climate. And so I guess it's good that people want to be sensitive and show that they can be compassionate. But I think that there are better ways to do it than throwing a blanket over people of color. I mean that doesn't acknowledge your blackness, and person of color doesn't acknowledge my Asianness or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a way to minimize people by, but also trying to act like you recognize them. Like the term itself is not problematic; it's how it's used. So when
Yeah,
I think people are speaking about minorities in general, and they don't want to go on long rants about lists, they'll be like by POC or POC, and then they might say like LGBTQ or LGBTQIA plus, but they're not going to list every fucking minority.
yeah,
So that's a way to reference large groups of minorities in the context of most likely writing, but when you're talking, especially like using the term people of color is either usually really lazy or somebody actively trying to subvert um, a group, or people who just don't necessarily understand the terminology, and they may be trying to be politically correct, but they just haven't taken enough time to learn about the terms enough to know the words they're using, and are just like, I thought POC was good, but I guess not. Maybe they're just being snowflakes. Like, it's like I appreciate the people who take the time
yeah.
to try, but they go to the wrong people a lot of times to try to get informed. And it's like, this is one of those things where this is why it matters to have a black person playing
A black
a black
person.
cartoon character.
You know,
Or
you know, as a I don't know what it feels like to be black or Native American or Indian or uh, from from some Middle Eastern country or an Eastern Bloc republic. I don't know what it feels like to be any of those things, but I do know what it's like to be Asian in America or Chinese American in America. And so, that's a big net, and it doesn't always mean the same thing for everybody. I think that it's a good term. It is. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that people shouldn't use it. I just think that it requires a little bit more nuance oftentimes than what I see in threads.
well, and I think it's okay if you're talking about the difference between the racism you experience as a person of Asian descent versus a person of color. Those are two different conversations, and
Exactly.
they may have overlap, but those are two completely different conversations.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, um,
I
when
think
we're
that,
just talking about general racism, like a person who's just generally racist against people of color might call you Vietnamese. You know what I mean? And that's like that's an intersection of POC, like anti POC sentiment and anti Asian sentiment. But in being misidentified, that's something that that person doesn't actually care about anti Chinese sentiment. They're just anti POC. So it's this weird, like, you know, there's a lot of things about
yeah,
racism in America that end up being this weird,
a lot of different nets.
yeah. And sometimes they intersect, and sometimes it's like, well, this guy may be anti Vietnamese because he fought in the war, and he just really, and people try to justify it and they try to rationalize that type of shit, but it's not all the same either. And that's kind of where, again, it's like when you have like those types of people, like I had a friend who he fought in, like, I think it was the Iraq War. It was one of them. one of those fucking dumbass wars. And I saw him make a comment that was like anti-Arab. And I was like, okay, we can't be friends. And he like approached me about it and was like, you know, does that really piss you off? I'm like, yeah, dude, I can't be friends with somebody. I don't care what you went through. Like, I'm not just gonna justify you making those bullshit ass comments because you decided to go to war. And he's like, well, okay, I get that. And I mean, I'm sure he has those feelings, but he doesn't show that shit around me to the point where, again, it's like, I'm not going to stop being friends with this dude because he made an anti-Arab comment one time, knowing what he went through. But I also openly expressed to him that that shit's not okay to me. And I'm not going to sit there and like be friends with somebody who's going to do that type of shit. So there's this element of like, when you are in a situation as a person, you have to give people the benefit of the doubt and give them the chance to change. Otherwise, it's like, you can't really have a coexisting society, or there's like never really opportunity for people to grow.
Boundaries aren't walls. They can be moved.
Yeah.
And boundaries exist to let people know when they're getting close to the edge so they don't fall off of something. And I think boundaries are supposed to exist to give people that opportunity that you've described. It's just when people break the boundaries multiple times, eventually enough's enough, and you have to be like, oh, I'm sorry.
Yep. Because then again, it's like, you know, I've never seen that dude break that boundary around. He's never done it around me. So not to say that he doesn't have those feelings. But when you are able to have that kind of growth exchange, that's the only way you're going to ever have lifelong friends that, you know, everybody, you don't have to agree with. Like, there's never going to be any two people that agree on everything forever. And the only way to keep those people around is to know where the boundaries are that you have in your own life and where they intersect, to say, hey, this person crosses these boundaries and these are not, you know, they're not okay with me, but they're okay to keep as a friend. But these boundaries aren't okay. And, you know, I think that's how we end up with fucking American Nazis. Like, not enough people have put their boundaries where they're not going to be friends with Nazis. They're like, oh, well, First Amendment, I don't know. I give them the chance to have their own viewpoint. No, fuck that. We're not supposed to be friends with Nazis in this.
Well, that's just characteristic of appeasement, really.
Yeah.
You go let them say what they're going to say, and, you know, they'll just go off to become productive members of society. Well, that was the same way that the global powers, especially the European powers, approached the expansion of Nazi Germany, which was essentially, let's just appease and give them, you know, some fair ground. Let's give them a voice in the global arena, and they'll be happy with what they get. And obviously, people like that, people with those ideas, those ideologies, if they're given enough resources, if they're given enough motivation, enough fuel, they'll continue to expand and expand and expand. And you know, we have a very clear case study about how unproductive and how destructive that kind of a paradigm can be.
Yeah, we got to get back to, well, I don't know. Well, we definitely had constructive paradigms.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.